Whenever there's a major scandal that rocks the political world, it sometimes takes a little while to figure out which talking points politicians are going to attach themselves to. And in the immediate aftermath of the FBI serving this search warrant on Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago earlier this week, we heard a bunch of different things floated from Republicans. We heard about this could be the start of an assassination attempt. That made no sense. There's no evidence of that. We heard about this as an abuse of power. We heard all sorts of different things, but the one that they seem to be sticking with is the FBI planted evidence. Now, the Trump people have not even released the search warrant, and it seems as though they're not going to. The latest reports I saw this morning are that they are not releasing the search warrant. There is absolutely no evidence whatsoever that the FBI planted anything. There is also, it's sort of hard to believe that in a case this high profile, that is the approach that the FBI would take. If anything, my instinct is that the FBI would rather not have done this at all, because all of a sudden now Merrick Garland's getting death threats, Christopher Wray's getting death threats. It's crazy what is going on. I don't think that this is something they would do just for fun. But put that aside for a second. They are sticking with the FBI planted evidence. I had half a dozen examples for you of this over the last couple of days. And now people in greater and greater positions of power are starting to repeat this one. Here is Republican Senator Rand Paul, who is also floating without any evidence whatsoever that the FBI may be planting evidence. Take a listen to this. And it's seen as acceptable by many on the right for Rand Paul to make this claim absent any reason to believe it's true.
No, people distrust so much the government that we've gotten to the point where, for example, do I know that the boxes of material they took from Mar-a-Lago, that they won't put things in those boxes to entrap him? How do we know? Their lawyers weren't allowed to see the boxes go. They weren't categorized.
That's going to be a problem.
Thousands of documents were taken.
Yeah. Well, Rand, is there any reason to believe that such a thing was done? Because for everybody mentioning the planting of evidence, no one has been able to present any actual reason to believe that that happened.
How do we know that they're going to be honest with us about what's actually in the boxes? How do we know that was in the box before it left the residence if the lawyers weren't allowed to see everything? So, you know, they've lost a great deal of trust, and it's...
Yeah. So there's Rand Paul asserting it. And this is sort of the anatomy of a conspiracy theory. It will often start sort of quietly as an aside with the most partisan people. Trump's lawyers, for example, going, listen, it wouldn't shock me if they even planted evidence. Oh, yeah. And then people like Fox News hosts start latching onto it. And we played a number of examples of that from yesterday. And next thing you know, sitting senators and sitting members of Congress are doing the same thing. It almost seemed like Marjorie Taylor Greene got it from an OAN host. Here is Marjorie Taylor Greene yesterday nodding along as an OAN host says, maybe evidence was planted. And then I'll show you how later in the day she makes it her own.
In all of the documents and everything President Trump had at Mar-a-Lago, that isn't anything that the FBI needed to raid his home for. That is
no, we already talked about that earlier. The GSA approved it. The GSA approved the documents, mailed them, sealed them, and sent them to him. So why would the government give them to him for now the government to come take them back?
That's completely untrue, by the way, but that's not the focus today.
Unless they're planting something. Anyway, I got to switch back because we're literally almost out of time, Merge. I knew this would happen because you and I are...
So Marjorie Taylor Greene saying about unless they plan to plant evidence, yeah, and right. And then later in the day, Marjorie Taylor Greene going full-fledged in on this, tweeting, quote, I think, now look at the language, right? I think, so that's your thinking, you don't have evidence. I think that there is an extremely high probability that the FBI planted evidence against President Trump. Otherwise, why would they not allow his attorneys or anyone watch them while they conducted their unprecedented raid? They know the consequences of an empty-handed power move. This rings completely and totally hollow. It just doesn't pass the sniff test. And let me also talk a little bit about Marjorie Taylor Greene's use of the word unprecedented. Yesterday, we talked about Marsha Blackburn's comment, if they can do this to Trump, they can do this to anyone, to which we said they already do it to anyone. The question is, will they ever do it to people in positions of power? The other one that Trump and others have been talking about is that this was an unprecedented raid. First of all, I've been guilty of this as well. The FBI doesn't really do raids. I mean, this wasn't really a raid. They had a search warrant and they served it. That's what it was. It was a search warrant. They executed a search warrant. So the use of raid, it's colloquially used, and I do it as well. But understand that they served a search warrant. Unprecedented is a big focus for them. Trump said, no, this has never happened to any president before. And now a lot of these right wingers have latched on to the idea of unprecedented. Well, if it's never been done before, then it must be wrong. We've never had a president who did the things that Donald Trump did. So it's logical that, sort of like a mathematical equation. When you have unique inputs, you will have a unique output. And we're starting with a president who did things no other president has done. It's logical. It would be to be expected that the outcomes also are unlike those that we have seen before. And one such outcome is indeed a search warrant being served by the FBI on Donald Trump's home. There is no evidence that they planted evidence. If we ever learn that the FBI planted evidence, I will tell you that, and I will absolutely condemn it. For now, there's no reason to think that that took place.